Li Lu's most successful and well-known investment ever is in Chinese electric vehicle manufacturer BYD, short for Build Your Dreams. And Li Lu's Himalaya Capital reportedly had the foresight to invest in BYD as early as 2002, before BYD had ever produced a single car and when its core business was actually in rechargeable batteries. Since 2002, the stock is up about 5,600%, or about a 57x return on an initial early 2002 investment. And Li Lu has also brought BYD to the attention of some other pretty well-known investors. This is the third and final video in a three-part series here on the channel covering some of Li Lu's best investments. So if you haven't seen part 1 or 2 already on the channel, be sure to go back and check those out, and also subscribe for future content here on the channel. Now, the most notable investor who has joined Li Lu in terms of being invested in BYD is definitely Charlie Munger. And Charlie Munger is likely invested in BYD really in three different ways. Firstly, through Li Lu's fund, because Munger is an investor in Himalaya Capital. Secondly, through the Daily Journal Corporation's stock portfolio. And thirdly, through Berkshire Hathaway via their Berkshire Hathaway Energy subsidiary, who at the end of 2021 had made 33 times their original investment in BYD. They turned $232 million into $7.7 billion from 2008 to the end of 2021. Interestingly, Guy Spear, another friend of Li Lu's, is also invested in BYD through his fund, Aquamarine Capital, and from 2011 to the end of December 2021, Guy Spear had turned a $5 million investment into $53 million. And speaking of Guy Spear, in my last video here on the channel, I did say that to celebrate reaching 40,000 subscribers here on the channel, I would give away a copy of this book from Guy Spear, The Education of a Value Investor. So I'm doing a quick screen record on my phone here, which hopefully you're seeing as well. And we're about to pick a random winner. And hopefully this random comment that it selects has actually commented Aquamarine in the comment in the last video as requested. So let's hit start and see who comes up. And we have Ishan. Hopefully I'm not butchering your name. So Ishan, if you're watching this video, congratulations. You have won a copy of The Education of a Value Investor. So just shoot me an email, investingwithtom@gmail.com, and I'll get that all sorted for you. Now, BYD is actually so sort of ingrained in the Berkshire Hathaway and value investing ecosystem now, largely thanks to Li Lu, that BYD questions are actually a somewhat common occurrence now at Berkshire Hathaway annual meetings. And many of the senior managers, including the BYD founder and CEO, Wang Xiaofu, have even occasionally attended the Berkshire Hathaway meeting in Omaha, Nebraska. Now, the story of long-term growth and success at BYD is a pretty incredible one. The company was founded in 1995 by still the current CEO, I believe, Wang Xiaofu, and it quickly grew in predominantly the rechargeable battery space. And only 10 years later, by 2005, they actually had a massive 50% market share globally in mobile phone batteries. They had some pretty massive customers at the time, Motorola and Nokia, and they basically grew by essentially just massively undercutting the competition on price, but still, producing good quality batteries. They undercut competitors in the US, Germany, and Japan, and really stole market share very quickly. In fact, BYD didn't even produce its first car until 2003, and it didn't produce its first electric vehicle until 2008. But the experience in rechargeable batteries, I'm sure, was a bit of a head start for BYD, and this is what Charlie Munger had to say about the company all the way back in 2009.
BYD, although its founder is only 43 years old, is not some early stage venture capital company. BYD is one of the main manufacturers of the world of the rechargeable lithium battery, and it achieved that position from a standing start at zero under the leadership of the founder, Wang Xiaofu. And they went on into cell phone components and developed a huge position. Then finally, not satisfied with having worked a couple of miracles, Wang Xiaofu decided he would go into the automobile business as nearly as I can tell, there was zero experience in automobiles. And from a standing start at zero and with very little capital, he rapidly was able to create the best-selling single model in China. And that's against competition that was Chinese joint ventures with all the major auto companies of the world, technological marvels with way more capital and so on. This is not some unproven, highly speculative activity. What it is a damn miracle. And
the electric vehicle component of BYD's business so far has been very successful, and it really didn't actually take that long. In 2009, only 1 year after selling their very first electric vehicle, the EV component of the BYD business basically matched their phone component and rechargeable battery business in terms of revenue. And only 2 years later, it became their most profitable segment, which compared to many of the traditional automakers, kind of legacy automakers in the US, who are really, really struggling to make electric vehicles profitably, that's a pretty massive feat. And this is right back in like 2009, 2010. And just to give you a bit of a feel for where BYD now ranks in terms of global electric vehicle producers, let's compare them to the most well-known EV company in the world, I'm sure, which is Tesla. Now, in the first half of 2022, Tesla sold 565,000 electric vehicles. BYD sold 324,000, so they're reasonably close in the grand scheme of things to Tesla's scale with electric vehicles. But importantly, BYD does also produce a few plug-in hybrid vehicles as well, or more than a few plug-in hybrid vehicles. And if you combine the plug-in hybrid and the full electric vehicles of BYD, they sold 641,000 vehicles in the first half of 2022, which is about 90,000 more than Tesla. Now, like I said right at the start of the video, Li Lu has reportedly been a shareholder in BYD as early as 2002. Now, unfortunately, unlike in the US where we get quarterly 13F data and we can see exactly when super investors are buying and selling, we don't really get that type of reporting in China. So it's impossible to see exactly what Li Lu's BYD ownership looked like right back in 2002. But fortunately, in 2005, Li Lu actually had a significant enough stake in BYD to warrant substantial shareholder filings in China. And since then, we've actually been able to see exactly what Li Lu's been doing in terms of buying and selling. And to be frank, it's been much more buying than selling in the past 20 years. And he's really been a very long-term owner of BYD. So I'll put up on the screen here exactly the number of shares in thousands that Himalaya Capital has owned over the years in BYD. You'll see there was some pretty substantial buying in 2008, a little bit more in 2014 and 2015. And for the first time, Li Lu has actually started to sell some BYD in the past year or so. Here is that same purchasing pattern with the stock price overlaid so that you can see exactly what was kind of happening to the stock price of BYD as Li Lu was buying and more recently selling. And if we look at the overall value of the BYD position after Li Lu has even trimmed a little bit recently, it's still massive. I mean, the biggest investment we see for Li Lu in the United States is Micron. That's about a $600 million or so position, and BYD, even after a little bit of selling from Li Lu, is about double the size of that investment at about $1.3 billion. So what's actually driven the returns here for Li Lu and BYD? Has it been good underlying growth in the business, or has it just been a massive improvement in market sentiment and people just willing to pay, higher multiples of earnings and sales for BYD? Well, the short answer is it's actually been quite a bit of both. He's kind of had both of those engines really working in his favor. BYD, the underlying business, has grown, but the market has also increasingly started to really pay up for BYD shares. From 2008 through to today, BYD has grown its revenue from about $4 billion to about $40 billion, so it's about 10x its revenue. Now, its net income or earnings is much lumpier. I think that's Partly the nature of BYD's fairly low margin business, a small improvement or decrease in margins really significantly impacts its earnings, but nonetheless earnings have grown. They're up about 3.7x from 2008, going from 220 million to 816 million. But like I say, the earnings for BYD is lumpy. I mean, just in the last quarter, they reported $415 million in net income. So overall, in terms of revenue at least, BYD is about 10 times larger than it was in 2008. And in terms of market sentiment, the multiples have definitely expanded. The PE ratios have gone up. So in 2008, when Li Lu did most of his buying in BYD, BYD bottomed out at a PE of about 9 times earnings. And as of recording the video, it's about 84 times earnings. Now again, the earnings are pretty volatile for BYD, so I wouldn't read a huge amount into the exact number there, but even if we smooth out the lumps and use something like a price to sales multiple, the price to sales multiple bottomed out in 2008 at about 0.6, and today BYD trades at about 2.2 times sales. So whichever way you really slice it, the business sure has grown a lot, but there's also been some big improvements in investors willing to pay up for BYD shares. So exactly what kind of return has Li Lu captured in BYD stock? Well, we don't really know what happened kind of pre-2005 before we got those substantial ownership filings when we're able to see much more detail on when Li Lu's buying and selling. But what we do know is that BYD in 2002 IPO'd at about 3.4 Hong Kong dollars. Now, the Hong Kong dollar is actually pegged to the US dollar. So that allows us really just to look purely at what the stock price has done. Li Lu's results will not have been impacted significantly by changes in foreign currency, for example. So if he did buy some early shares at 3.4 Hong Kong dollars, he's done exceptionally well. But just looking at the timing of his other purchases, he may have paid actually as high as about 20 to 40 Hong Kong dollars between 2014 and 2016. It looks like he started selling a little bit in the 220 to 230 Hong Kong dollar range, and as of recording, BYD shares sit at about 185 Hong Kong dollars. So it looks like Li Lu did actually sell pretty close to the peak, the little amounts of BYD that he has sold, and he could have potentially purchased it as early as 2002 at 3 or 4 Hong Kong dollars per share. So that would imply that the highest possible return Li Lu has made on some of his shares is about a 67x return, and the worst possible return Li Lu could have made, which is probably his purchases in 2014 to 2016, would still be about a 4 or 5x return. So whichever way you slice it, the return is somewhere between amazing and off the charts. Now, in terms of a quick update on what Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger are doing with their BYD shares through Berkshire Hathaway, Berkshire purchased their 225 million shares in 2008 and basically haven't touched them at all until just in the last month or two. So in August and September, we actually saw Berkshire start to sell a few of their BYD shares. And it looks like overall in August and September 2022, in total, they have reduced their shareholding by about 8%. Now, in terms of lessons from this investment in BYD from Li Lu, there are really 4 key points that I picked up and that I think we can learn from. The first is that he simply invested in a great growing business. BYD has 10x'd its revenue since 2008 and much more than 10x'd since Li Lu probably got in 2002 or 2003. If you've ever read 100 Baggers, the book by Christopher Meyer, he will talk about kind of 2 engines for exponential kind of multi-bagger returns, and one of them is just huge growth on the underlying earnings of the business. The second one is a bit of multiple expansion, always helps as well, and Li Lu certainly captured some of that with BYD. The second thing is gifted management. We heard some of the comments from Charlie Munger about, the management team at BYD, and it's clear that they made a pretty massive transition from, mobile phone components and rechargeable batteries to electric vehicles, and it's really been very successful. So gifted management has most certainly helped. Thirdly, although Li Lu has benefited from higher P ratios and higher price to sales ratios over time, he did pay a reasonable price. He probably bought most of his shares around 10 times earnings in 2008, and that offered a lot of downside protection, should the business not have had this huge home run kind of growth in earnings. And finally, the power of just holding for a long period of time. I think a lot of people really underappreciate how hard it can be sometimes to do that, and Li Lu has probably owned his first BYD shares for about 20 years now, and throughout that time the stock has been pretty volatile. There's been years where it's been down and flat for a pretty significant period of time. And he also didn't have an anchoring bias. He probably purchased his initial shares at 3 or 4 Hong Kong dollars, and he probably paid as high as about 40 Hong Kong dollars in 2016, 13 or 14 years after his first purchase. So lots to learn here from Li Lu's investment in BYD. I do hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please subscribe to the channel so that you can catch future content as well. And I hope you enjoyed this 3-part series on some of Li Lu's best investments. If there's any other investors you'd like me to do a short, best investment series on here on the channel, let me know down in the comments section below. But that's it from me for this one, and I'll see you on the next video. Cheers.